Glad to see you here today, those of you who could be here, and glad to have you today, those ones that can be with us on live stream today. I know that we have a couple of new families that let me know that they're going to be with us today at live stream, and it's great that you could be with us, and it's great that we can worship God together, and I hope you view that as a tremendous blessing. There are a lot of deeply disturbing things happening in the world for sure. But the great comfort that we have is that we have a God who loves us, we have a God that watches over us, and we have a God that listens to us, that we can turn to, and the world needs to see that there is a place to go to in that regard. We've been going through a series at this moment called Taking Care of the House. And we're about to jump into the fourth of those lessons, but I want to remind you of a few things that are coming up in the near future. September the 26th, which is shockingly just around the corner, we're going to begin our 2021 Bible series, which is about unity that can be found in Jesus. We've got 3 speakers that we've prepared for this: Leo McKinley, Gary Knuckles, and Keaton Pierce. So you want to mark down September the 26th as the beginning of our 2021 Bible series, and that'll continue each week for the next 7 weeks after that. So into the beginning of November. So mark that on your calendar, tell your friends and family, and invite them to participate as well. Now, taking care of the house. We started a few weeks ago, last week actually, talking about landscaping. That if we're going to take care of the house, the landscaping matters, because the way that we present ourselves to the world, what they see first should be the character and the nature of God. But there's got to be an honesty in that. There's got to be a truth to that. That's just the introduction, because when people move past the landscaping and pull up to the house, they have to be able to see the structure that's there. And our structure, our faith, our lives, and the way that we construct that must be built on the foundation of Jesus Christ. He is the chief cornerstone. And when we build up from Jesus, out of the substance that he provides for us, out of the substance that he gives us in our faith, to be able to walk like him, to speak like him, to act like him in the world around us, that we have a life that is built up, that can withstand any temptation, that can withstand the trials and tribulations that come our way, that we can live with great joy and happiness in such a structure built on Jesus. Take care of how you build your structure. We began by talking about the spills that take place in our lives when you're doing repairs, when you're decorating or whatever. When you spill paint, something comes out. But what comes out is only what's in to begin with. And so when we spill something ugly into the world, it's because there was something ugly in us. As Christians, we have to take responsibility for what's in us. Take out what is dark and hateful and ugly, and put in what is beautiful and kind and good. Control what comes out of us. So today, we talk about company. Do you love having good company at your house? Do you love being good company at someone else's house? You know, when we think about the power of company and the joy we have from connecting with other people, when we can think about what benefit that gives us and one another, it's a powerful thing to be company and to be able to have company in this world. And when we realize the impact of our actions as company, we can see that as Christians, this is so important because we impact the world by showing a whole lot of Jesus to the world, especially now, when people need it most. Because if there's darkness, they need Jesus. If there's discomfort, they need Jesus. If there's a lot of hurt going on, they need the people of Jesus to show them Jesus. And when we talk about company from a Christian perspective, we can do that. We're going to dive around the love your neighbor as yourself, but we're going to begin by showing great love for Jesus by opening up our gospel and go to John chapter 2. Let's talk about Jesus in John chapter 2 and the kind of company he presented himself to the world around him in his community. And as we go to John chapter 2, immediately you might be thinking to yourself, okay, I'm familiar with this because it's that first miracle of Jesus, isn't it? And you might be tempted to tune yourself out a little bit. You're like, oh, I got this. Water to wine, I kind of got that one. And it took place at a wedding, I got that one. But there is more to it than just turning water to wine. And it's more to it than just the fact that this is the first miracle that Jesus performed in his earthly ministry. There's a lot to this in John chapter 2, because it would be after this he would cleanse the temple. And after that, in the midst of cleansing the temple, he would say that he'd tear down the temple. In 3 days, he would raise it up. And they were like, what are you talking about? It took forever to build this, but he was talking about his own body. There was a lot going on in John chapter 2. At the beginning of his ministry, he kind of kicks the door open and moves right into what's going to take place in the early development of Christianity. But here in John chapter 2, at the beginning, at the wedding in Cana of Galilee, we see Jesus and the idea of company. And that may not be a perspective we looked at this before, but we should. Read along with me. I'm in John chapter 2. I'm going to begin in verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now, both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it. Do it." Now there were 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, that is the servants, "Fill the water pots with water." And they filled them up to the brim, and he said to them, "Draw some out now." And they took it and take it to the master of the feast. And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. And he said to him, "Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine. And when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. And he manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. All right, 11 verses. Kind of a short text to work out of, but it is so full of information. It just fills to the brim and then over when we're talking about Jesus and being company. Because what we see here is that Jesus is part of a community, isn't he? And that's an odd thing to think for just a moment. We picture Jesus in our head as the Son of God, deity, the creator, and he's come down to earth, and now here he is acting in a sense of community. We don't know exactly. There's 4 estimations of where Cana of Galilee is. The most common one is only about 8-9 miles from Nazareth. And so this would have been in proximity to his family and his people and the place where he was raised. There would have been some familiarity to that. Now, we know that he took his disciples there, and we know his mother was there. We see that he's in the midst of something that is very personal and an intimate moment. It's a wedding. It's a marriage. And for the Jewish people, this was a time of great celebration, a great joy, and it could last an entire week, the celebrations. We have records showing some of the marriage history of that. And so the intensity of this, the personal nature of this, we see Jesus being part of community. He could have been doing so many other things, but he's here at a wedding. See a man and a woman come together to celebrate joy in the community. That's amazing. That is amazing. It's so personal and so beautiful to see Jesus acting that way. And he's there with his mother. He's there with his disciples, of which we know there's probably maybe 4, maybe 5 at this time. If you go back to the previous chapter in John, Andrew would have got Peter, and if John's the one that was talking with Andrew, then that would have included him, and then Philip and Nathanael at the end of that. And in John chapter 21, verse 2, we know that Nathanael's actually from Cana, so he probably had some people he knew here, maybe actually in the wedding party. But we can see it's very personal. It's very intimate, what's going on, part of community. But in this situation, when Mary comes up to him and he says they have no wine, this was a bit of an issue, a social faux pas, a moment of possible great shame for the bride and the groom, because this celebration and joy that could have taken place because they provide for the guest would have come to a halt because they lacked the provisions necessary for the wedding celebration. And so Mary sees that there's an issue, and she's going to bring it to his attention. This is Jesus handling the situation with community. Because you see, his mother's the one that brings it to his attention. And Jesus replies to her that there's going to be some hesitation in this, but he's going to do something about it. But if you noticed what Jesus does, when he does something about it, he calls for the servants. And it points out Mary must have had some position of authority there because she was able to ask the servants to do whatever Jesus said. So she gave a particular command, suggests maybe she knew the wedding party, maybe she was pretty tied to them. And so Jesus asks the servants, he's including community, go take these water pots, the ones used for water for purification of the Jews, which means they would have had them for cleaning their hands or their utensils. They would have probably been made out of stone, solid piece of stone. We have some archaeological evidence that they would have been quite vast. That's why in the picture I'm using really, really large ones, because they would have held 20 to 30 gallons apiece, but might have been carved for one single piece of stone. And if they're used for purification, there would have been no elements, foreign elements that would have corrupted them. And he says, fill those up with water. And so 6 pots at 20 to 30 gallons, you're looking at 120 to 180 gallons of water filled to the brim. He's asking the servants to do that. And he's asked the servants then to take what they draw out of that and take that to the master of the feast. Jesus is kind of sitting in the back on this, isn't he? And not a lot of attention is being pointed to him, but he's causing things to happen, being good company, taking action that's going to have an impact and effect on other people. And so the master of the feast takes this and he drinks, and he's amazed at what's happening because this is superior wine that was created. And because of that, he goes to the groomsmen and he compliments them on this act. It wasn't a social faux pas. There was a great kindness and generosity and an abundance that was given, that you would save the very best, this kind of quality for last. And because of what took place here, the Bible says that the disciples believed. And so we start the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. And as I said, he's kicking in the door for his time on earth leading up to his sacrifice on the cross when his hour would truly come. Now let's think about that in terms of community. I put this picture up because it's an outside dinner thing. Could be a wedding, could be. But I remember there was a time when me and some friends got together and we wanted to do a big gathering of people, and so we set out a table outside and we put out the china. Why not? We're in our 20s. Let's enjoy life for a little bit and get your friends together and let's get out the good food and let's make something happen. It was just a really fun night outside in a yard, spending time with good company. And all the people gathered there were concerned that, one, they got to be company, so they wanted to do it right, but they also wanted to be good company for the benefit of the other people. That's what we need in company, an impact, a moment to share with people. Sometimes you have to realize that people need company. They may not ask for it, but if you keep your ears perked up, people have a need, and you might have to go out and be good company just to help people get along. You might be invited to be part of the company. You're going to be the good company, or you're going to be the bad company that comes along. You know what I'm talking about. There's some people when they come in a room, whether it's at your work or your school, and you're like, oh my, it's that guy. We got to deal with, this is going to be 2 hours of solid complaining every single day. This is the guy that's going to kill the mood that's going on. This is the person that's going to tear it down. This is the person that's going to show no regard for anybody else. That's bad company. You have the moment like a picnic, something just fun to do. You want to be good company and contribute and bring and be a part of something that's good. I love this picture. It's a picture of a grandmother and their grandson. I believe they're in Malaysia, and it does juxtapose it plus the unexpected bit of a laptop. I love the connection that's going on there, and maybe they're connecting with another family member that's in another part of the world. But the company that they keep and sharing this very personal, very good moment in family, the kind of company you want to protect and keep and build up. It reminds me of my buddy Mitchell's grandmother, Felsie. She was a gem, absolute gem. I think about when I would go over to her house with him and we'd play football or basketball or whatever, and Felsie was so good at hosting company. And that I remember one time in particular, we finished playing, and I used to play a lot of basketball back then, and then we'd come in and sit down, and she would bring out a tray of lemonade. I mean, you're kids, so you'd think Styrofoam cup would do just fine, but not at Felsie's house. That would be literally a tray with a glass jar of lemonade full of ice. And it wasn't the Styrofoam cup. She would pour you those special cups. Sometimes it was from history in the family or whatever. And then she would want you to sit down and we're just going to talk because that time is important. You mattered to her and she made you feel incredibly important, even over just a cup of lemonade. She was also the kind of person that even when at her table, at her house, she would invite people in, a whole host of kinds of people in our small town. There was once when I was horrified when I found out that the town drunk, one of the worst people in the neighborhood, she had over and fed him a meal. And I'm like, what is happening? That could be a dangerous character. And she's like, no, that guy needs love. That guy needs someone to show him a brighter spot. Whether it's a couple of eggs and bacon that helps him do it in that moment, I'm going to have good company and show him that kind of love and consideration, make him feel important at that time. She would have politicians over, and of course they needed campaign funds or whatever, but she would host those people, state-level positions, at the same table that she would with the people that were super, super poor and incapable. It didn't matter with Felsie. There's even a moment, one time that I think is the most hilarious, in which Mitchell was a massive WWF fan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, The Undertaker, all that business. And she took him, maybe me, not going to admit it, to see one of the wrestling events. Not her thing. But there she was with Mitchell, possibly me, cheering on Stone Cold Steve Austin, fighting The Undertaker. Get him, Undertaker. Kind of cute, kind of funny, but amazing. Not her thing, but to be good company, you don't mess it up, you cheer him on too. And that was the special thing about her as a grandmother, is that she made you feel important. She made you know that you were important, no matter the circumstance. There's a whole lot of Jesus in that, isn't there? And that's why we talk about company. It's a moment to show a whole lot of Jesus to the world that needs a whole lot of Jesus right now. And we, as Christians, get to participate in that. That's why when we look at stories like Jesus being company in a community with things that you could easily dismiss, it's just a wedding feast. But to Jesus, it wasn't just a wedding feast. I mean, with Jesus, he'd been to all the weddings before. He's the creator. He'd seen the first one with Adam and Eve, and he was there in that moment when they came together and were husband and wife, and all the ones leading up to this point. It might have been something easy to dismiss. This is just your neighbors down the road, but it matters because it is your neighbors down the road. To be there in that moment, in that celebration, and not just be there, but be exceptional company, so that when a dilemma comes up, you're able to do something about it. And that's where I want us to dive in just a little bit deeper. You see, in the midst of that moment, the unexpected, we can say this is just the first miracle that Jesus ever did. We could say it was, he cares about weddings, therefore we care about weddings too. But the real crux of it, the real pinnacle point in which it turns, is how abundantly Jesus gave to the people. How abundantly he participated in this. I mean, even the act of turning water into wine, we might just say, wow, that's really, really impressive, I guess, almost like a parlor trick, but not really. It's an abundance of his power he's putting on display in a very subtle and nuanced way. The water pots were filled to the brim, all 6 of them to the brim. You couldn't add something in and kind of fake your way through this. It's filled to the brim. Even the composition, when you stop and think about it, from taking water and turning it into wine as a substance in the grape juice, the composition's totally different. This isn't Jesus just twiddling his fingers a little bit and the molecules kind of change a little bit. But the amount of mass nitrogen and carbon and the elements that you have to not just shift, but to create and add to a situation is showing Creator God power. Creator God power is taking place in the subtlety of this particular miracle. And he's doing it in abundance. 120 to 180 gallons. Abundance. But how does this not draw to our minds all the abundance Jesus gave the community throughout the world? You think about John chapter 6 when Jesus fed the 5,000 with just a few loaves and a few fish, and there was thousands of people that were there. He fed the 5,000, but it was in abundance that he did so that they took up 12 extra baskets. 12 extra baskets. It's an abundance. You think about those moments that Jesus spent with people, just little moments that Jesus spent with people. Can you imagine? Can you imagine having 1 hour with Jesus on this earth? What would you do for 1 hour with Jesus? Just to talk and listen? Just to sit at his feet? Can you think about that time when he was at Mary and Martha's house, and there he was just sitting, visiting in a house, in community, in that personal time with someone, giving that? That's abundance. And Mary and Martha were doing their various things, but he gives that moment where he's teaching, listen, You can fix the house up, but that's not important. Spending time with people, that's important. That's abundance. You think about being in the house in Mark chapter 2. We're not exactly sure which house. It's very possible it was maybe Peter's house or someone nearby, his mother-in-law's house rather, because he had just healed Peter's mother-in-law and a little bit before that. And so now he's in a house and the crowds are gathering around, and in abundance he's given teaching and healing and spending time with them. But even in abundance to the point that those guys take in through the roof, let their friend down. And in abundance, he does healing, but he also forgives the man's sin. Can you imagine just having that moment with Jesus, one little moment? But how about in abundance, he gives to his disciples who walk around with him for 3 years. They get 3 years to walk and hear Jesus and sit with him and talk with him and be with him. It's abundance that Jesus has given to transform their lives, and in turn, transform the lives of so many through his church and the mission that they fulfill and we fulfill. And then in abundance, we're given the promise to be with Jesus for eternity. Really, it's the nature of Jesus for people in good company, being a part of community. That's got to strike us, because if that's what Jesus is doing and that's really his nature over and over and over again, then the way that we view company has got to shift. It's got to shift. It's easy for us to think in terms of, well, you know what, when I'm in the company of other people, they get what they get. It's just who I am. Whatever happens, happens. Or when I'm in the midst of company, I'm just going to kind of coast through and maybe not do too much about it, and that's just the way it's got to be. But as Christians, that's a little negligent. As Christians, that may be a little too reckless. As Christians, that might be a little too irresponsible. As Christians, that's really not having the intent that we saw in Jesus. Jesus could have been doing so many other things, but with intent, he was in community, being company at a wedding, or at Peter's mother-in-law's house, or at Mary and Martha's house, or in with all the people he taught on the hillsides and in the mountains. Jesus was a part of community, and company mattered with intent. No, as Christians, we can't be so haphazard and reckless about it. We have to share the same intent as Jesus. We're getting to that love one another. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's what we're bumping up against here. But it wasn't just even the abundance of what he had done in that and the maximum number of wine that he could create in those 6 water pots. But there was a quality to what he did. It wasn't just the minimum amount necessary. It was the quality. And man, this is one we really need to hone in on. The quality of the company we are and the quality of company that we give to people. It matters. Jesus could have turned the water to any kind of other liquid and it would have been, wow, I can't do that. That's amazing. But it wasn't just some wine. It was the best. It was the best. And it was at a moment that would prevent these people from falling into shame for not having enough. So he could have just created an immense amount, but he created the best kind and saved it at a moment that wouldn't elevate him in that point, because how many people knew it was even him doing it? The servants, his disciples, pretty much it. Master of the feast didn't know. The groomsmen didn't know. So he's not even taking the credit in the moment. We get it in the story. But he's elevating people and making them seem important. It's abundance in quality as well. We go back to our scripture reading when it talks about owe no one anything except to love. And then we get into these commandments. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. Do not covet. And if there is any other commandment, they're all summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Love is a blessing to the neighbor and your community. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. And do this, knowing the time, that now it is high time. There's an urgency to what he's saying in this passage in Romans. To awake out of sleep, for now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. The night is far spent, and the day is at hand. Therefore, let us cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. There's an urgency to what he's saying, and how we consider the company, and how we involve ourselves in the way that Jesus would want us to. Right now, because of COVID-19, right now, because of tragedies in the world, there might be a temptation for the Christians to pull back, to miss out on the urgency. But right now is when the world needs Jesus. And right now is when we need to listen to the people around us so that we can be the kind of company that the world needs us to be in the Lord. There's so many conversations that are taking place right now. If you turn on the internet, if you turn on the news, it's just a garbled mess of noise. I've turned most of it out. Large chunks of it have completely been turned out. It's just noise at this point. Oh, there are some people doing a really good job, but there's a lot of noise. I'm more interested in hearing the people in my community. I'm more interested in hearing the people that I encounter when I'm out in a grocery store, or when you are at school, or when you are at work, and the people that are here, our church family, and the people that are on live stream. There are needs that are taking place. There's hurt that's taking place. Your ears need to be open to listen. Jesus at that wedding was willing to listen to Mary when there's a problem. He could have said, not my problem. I'm just here to enjoy the wedding. Not my problem. That's on the groomsman. He should provide for me. But Jesus is listening. And he says, I can do something about this in a very generous way. We have to be exceptional listeners, because there's people out in our world right now that need you to be involved in a way that you may not have expected, but they need you. And maybe it's a word of comfort. Maybe it's an arm around them. Maybe it is you taking something to them. Maybe there's a way that you can be a part of it. Do it abundantly, and do it exceptionally well, because that's how Jesus would do it. Maybe there's a way for you to connect with people and just really check on what they need. Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 and 4 guides us a way of thinking this is all about ourselves. And I'll do what I want when I want. I don't care what other people have going on in their lives. Philippians chapter 2, 3 and 4 says, no, Christians, you can't think that way. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit. But in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. Jesus did not do that miracle at that wedding at that time so he could stand up and say, right now, I know this is your wedding, but look what I did. In fact, it was the subtlety of what he did that was so important for us to read it 2,000 years later in the text. There was a nuance to it, but there was a great care that he gave for the needs of other people in community, the bride and the groom, so they would suffer no shame. The needs of the other people at the wedding so they could continue on in the celebration and the joy of community at that time. He thought better of others. Their interests mattered. Maybe there's a time where people are in need and you can be there. Sacrifice for others. There's a lot of gifts that we do not have that Jesus had, for sure, as he had all the power. But every Christian, as we talked about somewhat in our PM discussion groups a couple weeks ago, every Christian has the gift of service. Did you hear that? Every single Christian has the gift of service. That's something you can do, something I can do. Now, no matter what your circumstance is, there's a way that you can serve. We can't all do all things, but we can all do some things, and that makes a difference. Do not forget to do good and to share. For with such sacrifices, God is well pleased. Hebrews 13 and verse 16. There's a good we can bring to this world, and there's a world that needs us to bring that good. But I need to talk about the flip side as well in community. Do you know this guy? The nosy neighbor? The guy that's always peeking, getting in your business? All right, not a lot we can do about that legally and in compassion. But we got to make sure we're not that guy. We got to make sure we're not that guy. And we also got to make sure we're not the person that gives that guy reason to be that guy. Now, sometimes it's just, that's who they are. But we got to separate ourselves from the ways of the world. If we're going to be part of a community that's abundantly good and the kind that gives exceptionally well, we can't participate in the revelry, and we cannot participate in the drunkenness or in the lewdness or the lusts, in the strife or the envy. We cannot do any of those things that are the works of the flesh, because these are the things that tear down community. These are the things that tear apart good company. Oh, there's revelry and apparent joy in the midst of it, but it always ends poorly. We got to move away from that. Put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill its lust. This is being good company. And right now when you leave and say, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Go listen. Go make sacrifices. Go consider how you are in the community. Do you pull yourself back? Do you just kind of coast through? Today, I would challenge you to live in your community, with your company, with the people around you at any moment with great intent to love them, to care for them, to lift them up in the way that Jesus would do that. If you do that, there's a lot that people can say about the darkness in the world, but if you do that, now you've given them a lot of Jesus to talk about so they can see a lot of light in the world as well. That's our responsibility, to lift each other up and make sure that our life is moments of joy and celebration because Jesus is real, Jesus is true, and Jesus cares about us from the simplest moments in our lives to the most important too. Jesus cares right now if you are a Christian. Jesus cares right now if you are trapped in your sins, and this church does as well. There may be something that's just eating you up, but you know what? In community and in church family, we can go through that together. We can lift each other up together. Love your neighbor as yourself means I care about your sins, and I care about you coming out of them, and I care that you know that salvation is possible, that there is freedom that can be had in life. Jesus provides a way. If there's a way that we can help you in that, if you want to be free from your burden, come forward as we stand and as we sing.